This is the second part of the tile placement tutorial. In this part, we go over placing individual tiles and the spawner that will spawn in new tiles. So whenever you place a tile, it checks all the adjacency, and if there's not already a tile there, it places a new tile. Here we're checking out the old project from the last video, which we did the camera system, and then we missed a checkbox on a event begin play, which we need to enable click events, and that's going to be important to get the click events to work on the cells, which is what we're making now. So we're just going to create an actor, we'll call it cell_BP, and we're going to also make an interface, and that interface we're going to call grid interface. In the grid interface, there's only going to be a reference to the cell, and we're going to use that later in our grid spawning system. So in the cell, we're just going to grab in or pull in the geometry for the hex, and then we're going to turn on mouse over events, so that way the mouse events work with our cursor in the scene, and then we're going to get all actors with the interface, and we're going to get them with the grid interface, which once we set it up, that's going to be our main grid spawning blueprint, which we haven't actually created yet, but we're just going to get all the actors with that interface, and we're only going to have one in the scene, but we'll grab all of them. We also want to set up a reference for that, which is going to be the actual grid spawning system. And the next system we're going to set up is going to be the event graph. I'm actually setting this up wrong for what we need initially. I'm setting it up based on an old system that used multiple materials, and the system we need, which I have a screenshot of the blueprint on the bottom right, is actually going to be a lot simpler than what I'm setting up initially. We're creating a material. The material is very basic. We just have a parameter called color going into the base color. We also, I think, next video, we'd also dump that color into the emission just to kind of make the colors pop a bit more. But what we have here will work. In the construction script, we did set it up to get a reference to that dynamic material, and then we're also grabbing the initial color, so that way we have a copy of the original color, so we can kind of change it to be whatever we want without having to reset it in our blueprint everywhere. Here I'm realizing that you don't actually need all these bits, and I'm simplifying part of it. We're also going to set up the click event, which we will eventually use a branch, and it's going to do something different if it's clicked versus it's not clicked. That will mostly be once we get the color resetter. Right now I just turn it to, if you click it, it sets it to be clicked and then sets it to the green color. Next video I do set it to scale up a little bit, which is shown in the image, but I don't even set it up fully that way in this video. Here I'm realizing I don't need these grid reference gets. I'm just setting it to green as soon as it's done. Okay, here's our actual hex grid blueprint. This is going to be the thing spawning in the tile. You notice we did also have this up, the collision on the geometry. And I forgot to name things, and there you go. So when you hover over it, it changes color, and then when you click it changes green. So that's working. Excellent. So now that that's set up, we're going to move to the actual hex grid spawn system. We have the interface set up on this, and we're going to make a enumerator, or enum, I think I'm pronouncing that, yeah. And we're just going to make a list of all adjacencies for a hexagon. And since it's a hexagon, there's going to be 6 of them. So I'm just labeled it right, top right, left, top left, and then bottom left and bottom right. And we're going to use this within our function so we can check every single direction to see if the hex is there. On event begin play, we're only just going to spawn in the initial cell. We're going to add it to a list, and then we're also going to, at least for the first cell, we're going to check the box's extents. So we created a variable there, but we actually want an array, so we add that as a unique component to the array. Also going to grab the box extent as a variable. And that's everything we need to do on event begin play. The next part we're going to need here is we are going to set up the actual implement the interface, which is the cell placed interface, and then we're creating a function called place cell. We're going to have a target cell in the direction. Target cell will feed in the cell through the interface, and then the direction, we're just going to create 6 of these, and we're going to set 1 to every single direction of the hexagon. Obviously at a triangular grid you only need 3, or a square grid you'd only need 4, which I have set up. Maybe I'll do a video on that after this as a bonus. In the actual function, it's going to be kind of neat. We're going to spawn a cell if there's nothing there, but we need to calculate the adjacencies. So we're going to be using a little bit of math, and we're going to use the box extent. The math, I'm not great at math, but I can Google which formulas I need. Basically what I'm doing is I'm calculating the adjacency for a hexagon and seeing if there's something still already at that location. And if there's not, spawn something in. If there is, don't spawn anything in. Notice in the equation as we set this up that I'm using the same box extent. I'm using Y box extent for both directions of the equation, and the reason for that is because I'm using an offset. I don't want all the hexagons to be perfectly placed together. I want them to be offset a specific amount, but in order to do that I need to manually calculate what the Y box extent would be with the offset. So I derive the X box extent. I said Y box extent, I meant X, but I derive the X box extent from the Y plus the offset, which is going to be divided by the square root of 3. And then I'm using the direction to calculate which direction it jumps off from the hexagon, and there's just going to be a series of numbers. I'm calculating this locally and then converting it to world space. So that's what that transformer location is. Okay, and then in the selects, so this is the actual Y one. So you notice I'm using the Y extent even for the X because I'm deriving what the X extent would be. So that way I can add in the offset correctly. If you don't have the offset, you can just plug the Y or the X straight into there. You don't need to drive it from Y. Okay, so I'm just checking to make sure it clicks, just kind of a sanity check. Like, is the event begin play working, which it was. Okay, so now that we have that working, we're setting it up in the actual cells. I'm adding just a Boolean to make sure, like, hey, only do this if it hasn't been placed. And then if it does get placed, I'm activating that event. And then I notice I have a problem. Everything's rotated 90 degrees incorrectly. You can fix this in Unreal. You can change the transform. I'm used to using Blender, so I just dragged it in a Blender, rotated it 90, re-exported it, and then re-imported it, and it's working. Look at that. Okay, that's how to create a hex grid system. I was just checking to make sure they weren't overlapping. Y'all have fun. All right, we'll do the color change in the next video.